Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. You know, a lot of us that are into the precious metals for accumulation to preserve our wealth, we understand its value, and we also understand that whole nations understand its value. So I think information like this is quite intriguing from these central bankers on how they buy gold and how much they buy. And Small Gold is a channel you might want to check out and pay attention to as he does the numbers and research for individual banks. But this is kind of a recap here and an article from Kitco that talks about what central banks have bought gold in 2018. I think it's always good to kind of keep a pulse on this kind of activity because it certainly bolsters our reason for accumulating gold. And silver too, but gold I think is quite a unique way to preserve your wealth because the big nations are doing it for sure. Central banks are not only purchasing more gold in recent years, but a number of new buyers have entered the fray. This includes Poland and Hungary, the first European Union nations to buy gold since the start of the century, said Zhonglu Yang, senior analyst at the Salivate Metal's Focus. In the case of Hungary, the central bank not only bought its first gold in 32 years, but also increased total holdings by tenfold. Central bank buying has accelerated sharply, says Natalie Dempster, managing director for central banks and public policy for the World Gold Council. It has also become geographically more diverse, with several new countries adding gold for the first time in decades. And here we see a chart here from Kitco News, major central bank buyers so far in 2018. And we can see that Russia has taken the cake. But what's fascinating, this is up till August and September. What country is missing from this list, which is surprising to me? China. Interesting. We see Russia is at 159.8 tons so far up to August. Turkey has accumulated 54.7 tons up to September. Kazakhstan's adding a lot. 34.1 tons at number 3 for the buyers of gold this year in 2018. Hungary has added a little less at 28.4 tons. India has added 21.8 tons, and that doesn't surprise me. I thought they would be a little bit more, though. And Poland, which is new, has added 13.7 tons. Interesting and fascinating indeed. 16 different central banks have increased their gold reserves since the start of 2017. In its quarterly report on demand trends released this week, the World Gold Council reported that central banks collectively made net purchases of 148.4 tons in the third quarter, the most since 2015. Metals Focus is looking for a global central bank and gold purchases of up to 450 tons per this year, which would top 390 and 375 the last 2 years, Yang said. If so, this would reverse a 4-year gradual decline in net bullion buying since 2014, with last year's total down by 42% from the multi-decade high of 646 tons in 2013. And you think about that, you look back during that time, that's when the metals prices were really starting to get suppressed and fall from their highs, and most thought they would just climb right back up again, including me. And it was 2013 when I cashed in one of my IRAs, or my last job, and bought gold and silver with it, the largest purchase I ever made. Different organizations compile the data slightly differently. For instance, some use figures as they are released monthly by the International Monetary Fund. This tends to have a 2-month lag, thus does not include some of the recent purchases, some of those from Hungary. Other firms add up the figures even when they are announced ahead of the IMF data. From the start of the year through the end of August, central banks added 260 tons, said Dempster, who compiles data for the World Gold Council. This excludes data from Hungary. Still, this is a 50% increase from the same period last year. CPM Group's data show 11.4 million ounces of net purchases have already occurred, thereby already exceeding the 10.9 million from all of last year, said Rohit Savant, director of research. Bloomberg reported that central banks now collectively hold more than 33,000 tons of the metal. The news organization said this is roughly one-fifth of all the gold ever mined. That should tell you something. But it also make you ask another question. And who are the central bank buyers? From 2016 to the first half of 2018, the most purchases were made by a handful of central banks, including Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, and Liang reported the People's Bank of China, meanwhile, has been conspicuous by its absence since 2016. That is interesting. Where is China in this? What has been interesting over the summer is that we have seen new countries start to buy gold, Liang continued. And it could be since China is one of the largest producers of gold, they may be just adding a lot to their coffers and keeping a lot of it a secret, which would make sense because I don't think want us to know we're the largest holders of gold by our central bank by a long shot. Many of these other countries combined. Here in the United States, Poland has become the first, adding nearly 14 tons in the third quarter. Liang said this came the news that Hungary increased its gold reserve by 10 times. The Hungarian central bank announced this increase this month, and it has not yet showed up in the monthly statistics from the IMF. The central bank issued a statement saying it has hiked its gold reserves from 3.1 tons to 31.5 tons, all in October, its first purchases since 1986. Further, metal was transferred to Hungary. The ratio of gold to its reserves jumped from less than 1% to 4.4%, which the bank said its average of non-Euro area Central and Eastern European countries. It should be noted that the reason why these central banks are doing it are for the same reasons why you and I should accumulate gold, and that is to protect ourselves, to hedge ourselves against economic instability. Venezuela and all of its social unwise takeover of the nation with their socialist programs, which have bankrupted, at least for wise enough to repatriate their gold from which they can borrow by the sale of said gold to help fund their failing programs and policies. Very interesting indeed. Here's a quote: holding precious metals within the country is consistent with international trends, enhances financial stability, and may strengthen market confidence in the Hungarian economy, the bank said in its statement. Preserving its historic role, gold continues to be one of the safest assets in the world, which enhances stability and confidence even under normal market circumstances. And there you go. So it's something that around the world, every nation understands the value of gold. We understand the value of gold, even here in the West, even here in the United States. I think in part and parcel, I think the powers that be don't want us to understand that they understand the true power of gold. So that should give you pause and confidence that holding these precious metals is the right thing to do. Meanwhile, India has also been slowly increasing its reserves, adding 21.8 tons so far this year, with more than half in the third quarter, Liang said. This was the country's first major increase since purchasing 200 tons off-market from the International Monetary Fund in 2009. Part of the increase was related to the gold monetization program, but part could also be a reflection of portfolio diversification, Liang explained. Meanwhile, Bloomberg has reported that Mongolia bought 12 tons this year, although Liang added that the country itself has not confirmed this. Meanwhile, Liang said that Russia had continued to buy gold along the lines of 50 to 60 tons per quarter, with 159.8 tons for the year to date. The country has slightly bought above 200 tons annually over the last 3 years, she said. Kazakhstan has been buying 30 to 40 tons a year, and the consultancy expects this to continue, with the central bank already purchasing 34.1 tons. Turkey has bought 54.7 tons so far in 2018, including 18 in the third quarter, Liang added. Their currency is obviously in trouble. They've been having a lot of economic problems, Savant said. So then the question is, why has central bank gold buying picked up? Analysts list a number of reasons why central banks have been buying gold, from geopolitical concerns to diversification of reserves. Further, many of these purchases occurred at a time when gold prices were relatively low, especially compared to early this decade, when they briefly topped $1,900 per ounce, Savant explained. Spot gold dropped to a 3-month low of $1,160.75 in mid-August, after trading as high as $1,364 in mid-April. Further, Savant continued, many central banks have much of their reserves in the U.S. dollar, but the greenback may not remain as strong as it has been. When the dollar falls, gold tends to rise, and vice versa. They just keep looking for ways to diversify, and smart move, for sure. In the case of Russia, officials simply want to move away from the U.S. dollar, Dempster explained. And I think the BRICS nations are probably being pressured by Russia to move in that direction as well. Russia has bought a huge amount of gold over the past decade, she said, adding that this now stands around 2,000 tons, a 10-month-fold increase over the past decade. At the same time, Russia has recently sold the majority of its holdings of U.S. treasuries, and the Bank of Russia says it will continue the policy of de-dollarization. In other countries, the probable rebalancing related, driven a combination of rising foreign exchange reserves and a lower gold price, meaning the share of gold in total reserves has fallen, and they are a rebalancing back to the preferred strategic level. A lot of central banks do manage their gold portfolios in this way. The desire for diversification may also be driven by a deteriorating view of other reserve assets, Dempster continued. Gold mainly competes with bond from advanced economy countries in a diverse portfolio, but budget woes to the U.S. and Europe and Brexit in the U.S. have increased the long-term risk associated with these currencies. It also is worth noting that the new buying has been concentrated in countries that have especially low allocations to gold, she said. A shift in other currency allocations may also be driving some of the demand. Some nations are now holding China's currency in their reserves, reflective of growing trade links with China. Allocations in the Chinese currency can be expected to grow over time, giving rise to the shift of a more multi-currency system rather than one principally in the U.S. dollar, Dempster said. But any such shift could be destabilizing, and some central banks might be buying gold as a hedge in anticipation. And also is worthy of note that the dollar is the strongest of the worst of the countries out there. None of them are backed by anything other than fiat, which there is something for which to be said, but it's not nearly as strong as being backed by hard assets such as gold. And the dollar is the strongest, so they're not likely to really abandon it yet by any stretch, although as much as they would like to. Purchases expect to continue. Liang looks for the usual buyers, Russia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey, to continue purchasing gold. Hungary is more likely to be a one-off buyer, given that they have already increased their holdings by tenfold, she said. It will be interesting to see whether Poland will continue, given that they have been made steady purchases over the last 3 months. Dempster sees central banks collectively remaining net buyers. I think we may be seeing the beginning of a structural change here, and we could see significantly higher purchases from central banks going forward, coupled with a further broadening in demand. And the more these central banks buy up, I wonder how that's going to correlate with the mining of gold and the price, as that gold is just sitting in a vault. It's not doing anything. And just as is the case with us, the gold sits in our vaults, so to speak. And just as with gold jewelry, it's being held for cultural and financial reasons around the world. Gold is treasured, and I think that is why gold will be the mainstay of wealth preservation in a compact form around the world. So get some gold, hold on to it, and be your own central bank. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to y'all for watching, and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.